There's post-consumer, which is materials that have been that are discarded consumer products. In other words, water bottles is a good example of this. There's post-industrial recycled content. So if you were, let's say, stamping a footbed out of a sheet of material, all of the negative space of that would be waste from that manufacturing process that could then be recycled and used for new products. So that's like the basic difference between a consumer recycled raw material and a industrial recycled raw material.
I'm Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental journalist, and this is the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. Thank you for joining us so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. In episode 177 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we discuss what it takes to design high-quality outdoor gear using post-consumer recycled materials. Everything from how they differ from virgin fibers to the limitations and challenges of working with them in a technical product. We'll dig into how a commitment to sustainability shapes product development, where circularity fits into the broader picture, and whether today's recycling systems are truly scalable for the textile industry. We also talk about how consumers can better evaluate sustainability claims, and what's next in eco-innovation from brands like Rumpl. Rumpl's own story began in the back of a van, literally, when its founders found themselves stranded in the cold during a ski and surf trip in California. Wrapped in sleeping bags and sipping whiskey, they realized the performance materials used in technical gear could be reimagined for everyday comfort. Thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast today, Wylie. I am a huge fan of your brand, so I'm excited to have you on the show, and I know the listeners will be interested to hear you talk all things post-consumer recycling and just like about your brand in general. So to start, let's take a look at your journey to the point you are today and how Rumpl began and kind of how that was influenced by your love of outdoor spaces.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me and excited to have this conversation. So just want to say thank you for that. Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about these things sort of separately, my interest in the outdoor industry and participation in it. And then also like the founding story of Rumpl. So Rumpl was founded by me and a friend. Really the founding story is from 2012. We were both designers at design agencies in San Francisco and spent a lot of time surfing and mountain biking and skiing and doing all sorts of outdoor stuff together. And we had a week off kind of between Christmas and New Year's from our jobs. And so we piled into a van and went down the coast of California, just surfing all along the way, and had all our ski stuff in a roof box on the top. And the plan was to head east into the Sierra and then travel back up north to San Francisco skiing the whole way. And everything was going great on the way down, headed east. And first night camping in Bishop, it was like the coldest night ever on record in Bishop. 2 feet of snow fell, and we woke up the next morning with the car that would not start, completely frozen, and we were way out of cell phone reception or any sort of reasonable distance to walk into town to get help. So we just had to wait around in the car for a few hours for somebody to show up. We actually ended up getting really lucky because this guy showed up with his drone to do some drone photography in the area because typically doesn't receive that much snow. And anyhow, while we were waiting for someone to come to this location where we were curled up in our sleeping bags, just trying to stay warm. It was super cold. And we got to talking about how we loved sleeping bags so much and hated duvet covers. I still to this day loathe putting a duvet in a duvet cover after I've washed it, shaking it. Feels like I'm doing like those big ropes that like football players do. So anyway, we both said that very often after washing our duvet cover, we would use our sleeping bags on our bed. And both of us were like, why hasn't somebody ever made a blanket out of sleeping bag materials? That would just be so much easier to deal with. And that was basically the end of the conversation. Obviously we eventually got out of there and got back to San Francisco and still thought this idea was pretty interesting. So we went to a local fabric store and picked up some ripstop nylon and just really generic poly fill and sewed up the first 2 prototypes of what would eventually become Rumpl. And in San Francisco, most people live in fairly small apartments, at least we were at the time. And there's a whole lot of great activities and recreation and stuff in the city, in parks and things. And so both of us over time would take these blankets off of our beds. The product was originally designed for on bed at first. We would take them off of our beds and bring them into the park and use them for like concerts and, shows and things like that. And all of our friends saw them, and everyone was like, wow, this is a really cool idea. I want one of these things. And still at that time, we were unsure if this was just our friends kind of, giving us some credit or something like that. And so rather than really trying to start a business right off the bat, we tested the singular product idea on Kickstarter. And the Kickstarter did really well. We ended up raising about $250,000 in 30 days. And that was the moment where we were like, whoa, this is a really cool idea. People obviously want it. And that allowed us to really go all in on it. Excuse me. And leave our jobs and just focus on this full time. So that's the founding story of how the business got going. I would say that a big component to the brand and look and feel of Rumpl, and just our ability to, I think, speak authentically from the beginning was two factors. Number one, I was a brand designer before starting Rumpl, and so the brand always looked kind of polished from the beginning. And then number two, both of us were really avid outdoors people. Ton of surfing, mountain biking, skiing, rock climbing, camping. We both had vans. Like, just we're in the mix. We weren't in the industry as professionals. We were very much, core participants. And so we had a pretty good idea of color and style and what was trending and all that stuff in the industry. And all that translated right into the first iteration of Rumpl that we launched on Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like I talk to a lot of brands, and especially the smaller brands, they're oftentimes like solving a personal problem that they faced. So it's interesting that that kind of aligns with you as well. And when did sustainability become a big part of your guys' story?
Sorry, just did a little cough there. Sustainability became a big part of our story when we found the materials matched the durability and quality of the virgin materials that we were being shown in the early days of Rumpl. Now, I will admit, when we created the first couple of prototypes, we didn't do like a really robust sourcing exercise. I mean, we were emailing Alibaba suppliers, and we had no entry point into the global supply chain at all. And so we were basically just figuring it out through Google searches. And when we would get material samples from some of these factories, we weren't getting a whole, litany of recycled options or recycled versus virgin options that we could compare. We weren't really getting test results, on the materials and understanding their durability or color fastness or all these things. And so we basically went with what we thought was the best hand feel. And that was the focus from the beginning, is making sure the product felt really good. Later on, I would say probably 2 years in, we got shown a book of swatches when we were just doing our, run-of-the-mill Deb cycle for the next season's products. And a handful of them in there were recycled. And we were like, interesting. These look and feel and, score on test results basically the same as our current materials. Let's ask our partner to give us a whole swatch book of just recycled options. And so at that time, we were then shown probably 50 different material swatches that, all met our durability standards, our color fastness standards, our abrasion resistance standards, all the things that we cared a lot about from the beginning when we were just getting going. And we realized we really didn't have to compromise any of those things, nor did we have to really compromise price to get recycled content. And so it was a pretty easy decision. And frankly, the factory that we were working with did all of the sourcing exercise, bringing us those options. So it literally wasn't a consideration. It was like, oh, well, this material is recycled. It looks, feels, behaves as good or better than our current. We're going to obviously switch to this. Just sort of a moral position that I guess we both shared that we didn't even have a discussion about.
And from my understanding, you guys use post-consumer recycled materials. So do you mind explaining what exactly that means and how they differ from other options, whether
Yes,
that's virgin or other types of recycled materials?
Yeah, we use post-consumer recycled materials throughout almost all of our products. I'm going to speak specifically around blankets because that's what Rumpl is largely known for, and it represents 70-80% of our revenue. So that's really what I think people know Rumpl for. On our blanket products, 99 point probably 5% of the blanket is made from post-consumer recycled content. We currently do not have post-consumer recycled thread that stitches the product together. We do not have post-consumer recycled the core of the binding edge. So there's a core piece of string basically in there, and then there's a piece of material that goes around it and binds it together on the edges. The binding itself is recycled, the core is not. And then we have a cape clip feature on the product where you can wrap it around yourself and clip it together like a cape. That hardware is also not recycled. So by mass and volume, we're talking probably less than 0.5% of the total construction of the thing, but everything else is post-consumer recycled. And for us, what that means is it's PET bottles that are brought in through recycling programs, cleaned, shredded, and then turned into little plastic pellets, basically, that are melted down and spun into yarn. And then the yarn is then woven into our poly fabric face as well as our poly batting that goes inside the that's the fill of the blanket.
And how would that be different than like a pre-consumer recycled material? Do you know, or have you ever looked at those as an option, or were you always pretty much set on like, I want to make this from bottles?
Well, there's post-consumer, which is materials that have been that are discarded consumer products. In other words, water bottles is a good example of this. There's post-industrial recycled content. So if you were, let's say, stamping a footbed out of a sheet of material, all of the negative space of that would be waste from that manufacturing process that could then be recycled and used for new products. So that's like the basic difference between a consumer recycled raw material and a industrial recycled raw material.
Perfect. And you mentioned the like small percentage of components that you weren't able to actually make from recycled materials. So are those really the only challenges you've faced in using post-consumer recycled materials, or are there other challenges that you've run into?
I mean, some challenges would include, just the durability and testing standards that I mentioned early on. I mean, some of these materials do come in and they're well below what a virgin material might have, largely in terms of durability and strength. But generally, there's not a lot of limitations. This is more of a factor of just looming fabrics, but a lot of fabrics are typically, around 60 inches wide. We have products that are wider than that, and so we need to join those materials, but that's independent of it being, recycled or not. Generally for our category, there's not a lot of limitations on recycled materials. They work great, and there's an abundance of them. There's a huge demand for them, and so a lot of these mills and factories are prioritizing the creation and sourcing of them. And for what we do for our categories, it works great. There's not limitations.
And then of course we have to ask, are they recyclable again in the realm of textile recycling?
Yes, they are. So you could take a Rumpl blanket to a shredding facility, shred it up, and turn it back into those pellets that I mentioned. We currently do not have any programs stood up to do that for our consumers. We have a very, very low return and defect rate. It's like less than 0.5%. I think that's largely because we don't have any fit or gender or anything in our products. It's usually like manufacturer defect or something like that. And so we have a very, very low return rate. So we have not stood up any mechanism for consumers to return their product and have it re-recycled. However, they could do that if they were able to find a facility that could facilitate that.
Yeah, but like you're saying, there's not really a need for that unless it's damaged in some like major way. I guess like if coals fall on it from a fire or something and it melts part of the blanket. And so in order for it to be recyclable and like close the loop, then is it all made from the same material? So it's like a monofiber type material?
No, so it's a poly material. So it's a plastic material, and that plastic can all get melted down and then combined into these pellets again. It doesn't all need to have the exact same raw ingredients to be turned into these pellets. The chemistry of those pellets is it can be sort of a mix of things. And I'm not expert enough to know what specific composition these pellets need to arrive at in order to be usable for that use case. But I do know that you can take an entire jacket, for instance, shred it up into tiny little clusters and then melt that down and turn it into the pellets. And that includes the exterior shell, the liner. In some cases, there are like plastic zippers that are all recycled that can also go into that mix. So I think you can get a pretty diversified mix of raw ingredients into these pellets.
Interesting. And I mean, you didn't start out using recycled materials and it wasn't like top of mind, I guess, the sustainability aspect. So how has like your messaging around sustainability grown and changed to integrate discussing recycled materials and communicating that to consumers?
To be honest, we do talk about how many bottles are used in each blanket, and we talk about the use of post-consumer recycled content. But quite honestly, we've found definitively actually that our consumers care a lot more about durability and longevity and associate that more closely to sustainability than the raw ingredients in the product. And I agree with that, by the way. I think that things that kind of expire, I don't care if they're made with bamboo or, regenerative materials or whatever, it's still like, a thing that I need to get rid of and dispose of, and it creates waste. And so we really talk more about durability and longevity in our products than we do necessarily about the actual raw ingredients going into them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It does seem like that is kind of the primary focus for a lot of consumers in the sustainability realm. And do you think in the term in the industry of textile manufacturing and like producing goods with textiles, do you think that recycled materials is going to overcome virgin materials, or has it already outproduced virgin materials?
I mean, I think it's gonna come down for the mills and factories. It's gonna come down to pretty simple supply and demand economics. Like, what does the raw material supply side look like for them? Can they procure these raw goods at a reasonable cost and in excess? Is there demand from the brands that they're servicing to create their products with those things? And so I would say that as long as consumers are demanding recycled content in their products, and as long as factories and the supply chain is able to procure raw ingredients that meet those standards, I would assume that continues. I don't think that at least I haven't encountered a lot of consumers that like are unwilling to buy recycled materials if they meet the same standards as virgin materials. So I think it really comes down to consumer demand, supply side, and those two things kind of lining up with each other.
I thought I had a follow up to that, but I don't. Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, what do you think is coming down the pipe for Rumpl then? Do you have other sustainability initiatives, new advancements with recycled products, or anything that you're particularly excited about in and out of sustainability?
I mean, as it relates to sustainability, I did actually just have a conversation with our head of product about trying to source recycled thread and cores for our piping that are our edge binding around the side of the blanket. So, I think we could probably get to like literally a 99.9% recycled content in our product. I don't know that that's going to move the needle at all with consumer demand, or if we're going to even talk about that, but it's something that we will probably aim to do just to really get as far as we can in terms of raw ingredients for our products. Rumpl sits in a very good place, in my opinion, from a sustainability standpoint. We're a certified B Corp. We offset all of our carbon. We donate to tons of causes all year that are focused on conservation, access, restoration of natural places. So, I think for us, it's about maintaining those commitments and maintaining all of the hygiene around all of those things as we scale the business. We have, for the first time in our history last year, diversified suppliers. So we're now not single sourced anymore. We're with two distinct supply chains for a variety of reasons, and ensuring that both of those supply chains are meeting our standards is basically double the work. So I would say there's not any new initiatives. It's just to maintain, I think, the good status and good base that we've set for ourselves.
Do you think you guys would ever attempt to manufacture in the United States, or is that not reasonable?
Well, I
I
don't
know
know when
there's
this is
not a
going
lot
to
of
air, but we've
options.
certainly talked about it because it's November 13th right now, and we're about a week out from the election. So yeah, we've certainly talked about it. The fact of the matter is, I am personally a big believer in globalization. I think that the best way that humans will face the challenges of the future is to cooperate together and to leverage our respective strengths to the best of their abilities. And we manufacture all of our products right now in Asia. And the simple fact is that Asia has a strong comparative advantage in this category of goods over the United States. In other words, the opportunity cost for Asia to be, the opportunity cost for the United States to be producing Rumpl blankets is far higher than that of Asia. And so, not only that, but Asia actually also has an absolute advantage. In other words, they can simply produce more of this category of goods. And so, I think that the country that has the largest comparative advantage for any category should be the one that produces that category. And we should trade freely and, do so in a way that's fair for both sides. In some cases, perhaps that does need to mean some tariffs need to be implied, or duties, or whatever it may be, such that both sides feel like they're getting economic gain from the transaction. So all this to say, I very much like having a global supply chain. I think that it advantages us, it advantages our consumers, and we will explore other options if it becomes unviable for us. But I don't want to. I don't necessarily think that standing up a blanket factory in the United States is it would produce jobs. Of course, I don't know that they're great jobs that people want. And so I think that a lot of people want to manufacture things in the United States for various reasons, but for us, you're going to get a superior product at a superior price if it's manufactured overseas.
Yeah, and I guess since we are recording this in November, if anything changes with the new administration, you can let me know before we publish, and
Yeah.
we'll do our best to update it so it is as current as possible. But with that, how can listeners learn more about Rumpl and hopefully check out some of your products?
Easiest way is just rumpl.com, rumpl.com. We're on all the socials too, and you can check us out there. But probably the website is, the brand universe. You can get all the links from there.
Awesome. I'll be sure to include that in the show notes so people can access that easily. But with that, Wylie, thank you for taking the time to explain the Rumpl production. And is there anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, we're excited to be making great products, and we've got some cool stuff coming out in 25 that I think people are going to be excited about, new categories for us, and really looking forward to hearing customer feedback.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.